Previously, I shared some comments on my experience reading The God Delusion, that famous book on atheism by the Oxford evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins. This week, I'd like to wrap it up by commenting on a very narrow selection of objections that Dawkins had against Christianity and religion in general. To begin, take a look at one of his most famous quotations from the book. Maybe you've heard this before. It's literally the first thing you read when you crack open chapter 2. He says on page 51, "The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Those of us schooled from infancy in his ways can become desensitized to their horror." With an impressive demonstration of vocabulary, Dawkins brings up an issue that I have personally spent a long time researching and writing on. First off, there are some things about God in the Old Testament, and also in the New, which modern readers like us tend to find quite disturbing. You have God flooding the earth in Noah's day, Joshua driving out the Canaanites from their land, judgment over cities, judgment when Jesus returns, etc. I talk about this some in one of my earliest videos on this channel if you want to venture back there, but it's not a topic we can cover in just a few minutes here. Rather, I simply want to point out how surprised I was to find very little interaction by Dawkins on the Christian response to this challenge. Our theologians have been thinking about this, obviously. These stories of the severity of God have to be put in their theological context. God's actions are connected to his holiness, his righteousness, the reality of sin, as well as the biblical narrative of redemption. And although those elements are at the crux of this conversation, I have no memory that Dawkins mentioned any of this in his book. It's like his complaint against God does not even go one level deep into the debate. Why doesn't he go there? I worry that perhaps it's because Dawkins has raised the complaint to a bunch of Christians who were unprepared to deliver a response, which would lead him to think that we have nothing to say on the issue, and we're all just desensitized to their horror, as he puts it. And then again, Dawkins admits to his critics that he hasn't involved himself in theology very much because, page 15, most of us happily disavow fairies, astrology, and the flying spaghetti monster without first immersing ourselves in the books of Pastafarian theology, etc. So unless I misread this, he explicitly denies Christians the courtesy of understanding their view before critiquing their view. More on that later. Chapter 3 was an interesting read because Dawkins responds to 8 arguments for the existence of God. Thing is, most of the arguments he responded to happen to be arguments that I'd never use myself, at least not the way he defined them. For instance, one argument for the existence of God, according to Dawkins, is this: we have marvelous art from people like Michelangelo, who was Christian and whose artistry flowed from his connection with God. Therefore, God exists. Or there's the argument from admired religious scientists. Right? There are just so many great scientists who were or are Christian. Who are you to oppose them? What? I'm left wondering why he would even bother to critique such hollow and shallow reasons to believe in God. Perhaps over the years, Dawkins has pressured people to give reasons for the existence of God. They didn't know what to say, and so they came up with an off-the-cuff answer without careful thought. Be careful there, guys. We need to understand proper reasons for theism if we are going to maintain belief in God. And then you have chapter 4, where Dawkins addresses intelligent design. I was particularly interested in this chapter because evolution is an area of specialty for him. But admittedly, I was rather disappointed in how Dawkins presented the argument of intelligent design. He said on pages 146 through 147, creationist logic is always the same. Some natural phenomenon is too statistically improbable, too complex, too beautiful, too awe-inspiring to have come into existence by chance. And science's answer to this faulty logic is always the same. Design is not the only alternative to chance. Natural selection is a better alternative. It is a cumulative process which breaks the problem of improbability up into small pieces. Each of the small pieces is slightly improbable, but not prohibitively so. It's always interesting for me to hear how someone like Dawkins hears us. It seems that the intelligent design argument is getting mistranslated somewhere along the way. Intelligent design arguments have always been to say that natural selection, which itself is governed by chance effect mutation, can handle small changes. But there are other steps that simply cannot be broken up into small pieces, and even if they could, the sheer volume of small pieces necessary to go from single-celled to human life cannot be accomplished given the time of our planet's existence, even with an old-age Earth model. It seems that once again, I keep hearing these caricatures and shallow versions of how God is defended, and Dawkins seems to think that all we're able to bring to the conversation is those arguments. So he's debunking these arguments that sophisticated theists would never even use. Other atheists are better aware of the challenges they face. Like Fred Hoyle, he once said that the emergence of life in a godless universe would be like a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and constructing a large airplane, to which Dawkins responds, "At an intellectual level, I suppose he understood natural selection, but perhaps you need to be steeped in natural selection, immersed in it, swim about in it, before you can truly appreciate its power." Sure, it's important for a theist to understand natural selection before criticizing evolution. I just wish Dawkins would pay us the same respect by taking the time to understand some basic theology before he criticizes God in the Old Testament, rather than hastily comparing him to fairies, astrology, and the flying spaghetti monster. One of the themes in the God Delusion was the notion that science and God cannot coexist. You must choose either the path of faith or the path of reason. I've done some videos in the past addressing the issue, but let me quote from John Lennox, who says it well. He says, "Admittedly, there unfortunately are people professing faith in God who take an overly anti-scientific and obscurantist viewpoint. Perhaps Richard Dawkins has had the misfortune to meet disproportionately many of them. But that does not alter the fact that mainstream Christianity will insist that faith and evidence are inseparable. Indeed, faith is a response to evidence, not a rejoicing in the absence of evidence." So despite all our differences, perhaps you've started to see that there's actually a lot from Dawkins I would agree with. We both don't like anti-science agendas. We don't like blind faith. Reading through other parts of his book, I found myself agreeing that we don't like bigoted, uneducated, destructive, mean religious know-it-alls. We don't like people manipulated or pressured to believe in Christianity when in fact they remain unconvinced by the evidence presented. The main difference, I think, between Dawkins and myself is that Dawkins thinks the problem is religion and the solution is to get rid of it. For me, the problem is people giving bad evidence for God. It's people using religion in bad ways, and most importantly, the problem is sin. The solution is to recognize that Christianity really is defensible, to repent of sin, and to turn our lives over to Christ. He is the only one able to fix our souls and fix this broken world we are living in. Anyway, that's just a small sample of responses and comments I had while reading through The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.